I will say that I was a good law student. I wasn't the smartest in the class. You won't see my name at the top in terms of having graduated with honors, but I was able to find myself to jobs that I enjoyed and to be satisfied and fulfilled with it. So I would encounter other people who would say, well, I don't know if I could get into law school. And I would say, well, yes, you can. Okay.
Welcome everyone to Seek, Go, Create. This is your host, Tim Winders, and this is a fun conversation. Today, I'm going to be talking to an author, someone who's got a background in law. They've got a background that I love to read that are in the nonprofit world, also in the profit world. She's coming to you today from Washington, D.C. I'm coming from somewhere in the middle of America in South Dakota in the RV. And we're just going to have a fun conversation. Here's the reason I think it's going to be fun for me. And I think for you is that we come from different backgrounds and we're going to embrace that and have conversations about, hey, what was it like for you? What's it like with this? And I love doing that because it stretches me and I think it stretches all of us. And I think we need that. So hang tight. We'll get to that in just a moment. I want to remind you, if you have not checked out our YouTube channel, you may be actually watching this on YouTube. If you are, make sure you subscribe and continue watching the videos we have. But if you have not checked out the Seek, Go, Create YouTube channel, make sure that you visit there because we do a few things with these episodes. We put up the full interview episode with some edit. We clean it up and do some things with it. But we also like to put up about 2 to 5 minute clips of every episode so that if you needed to just check out something real quick and see if you wanted to just check the longer interview, you could just kind of go do a short video and check that out. So if you haven't checked out our YouTube channel at Seek, Go, Create, go check it out and subscribe. And then make sure you look at some of those shorter videos so that then you could go listen to the longer interview format. That is one of our fastest growing platforms right now on YouTube. So make sure you check that out. And thanks for doing that. Today, we have Veta T. Richardson as our guest, and she's the president and CEO of a global nonprofit professional association of, get this, 45,000 lawyers serving over 10,000 companies across 85 countries. Those are some big numbers. I might get her to talk a little bit more about that. But here's what I like. I like the short bio. She says she's an author, business strategist, and leader. All of those fit perfectly with Seek, Go, Create and what we talk about here. Her work and her story are inspiring people across the country to find the potential leader within themselves. Veta, welcome to Seek, Go, Create.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm glad that you're here also, Veta. And we're gonna have fun with a lot of things. Gave you a little bit of prep here, but you and I bump into somewhere. And I don't know how we do that. You're in DC, I'm in the middle of America. One of us are gonna have to travel. But let's just say let's just say we're on a plane or something and we just strike up a conversation. I don't know anything about you. I don't know if it's business setting or whatever. And I just ask you what you do. What do you tell me? What do you tell people when they ask, what do you do?
Yeah, well, I work in a nonprofit. We're dedicated to helping lawyers with education, with information, and the ability to network with one another. And it's a global group. So we're connecting people all over the world, all around the topics of law.
All around the topics of law. Okay, so very cool. And the reason that would be intriguing to me is because as a business owner, this is going to get us started either in a fun way or an awkward way right out of the gate. Sometimes when I hear lawyers, I kind of go, oh, lawyers.
Right.
Well, I've got a background.
Well,
we've had real estate companies and all that. And it's like this love hate. It's like, man, I love lawyers, but dang, sometimes they cause issues. So what's it like hanging out with lawyers?
It can be very challenging. Well, fortunately, I used to be one. So sometimes I understand the pressures that they're facing a little bit better, but it's a group that always keeps you on your toes. They have high standards, have a lot of pressure and responsibility for the companies that they work for. So yeah, it can be a challenge, but I enjoy it.
Good. So I'm actually going to flip some things in the order I usually go. Now, I told you we're just going to have fun with conversation anyway. But one of the things I typically do is start off with people's stories. But I want to start off with I want to go big picture with Vita's mission right now,
Hmm.
because I think I told you I read about half your book, and I told you that in a good way. I read half of it, and then I also told you apologetically I only read half of it yesterday. But I could kind of tell that you're thinking big. You're a big thinker. So we're going to get into the book. We're going to get into your background. We love to talk
Hmm.
about stories of overcoming and how we become who we currently are. But what's Vita's big mission? What's your big picture right now? What are you working towards?
I want to have an impact, a positive impact on other people. And that's because all my professional life, I've always been a person who was engaged in mentoring or reaching out, and someone was helping me. So I'm a really big believer in the concept of pay it forward. So this book is really my passion project, and it's about trying to reach a wider sector of people, trying to make recommendations that people who aren't in law could find, as relevant to them as some of the lawyers that I've worked with too and mentored. And it's really about being a teacher, which I think, at the essence, appeals to me.
Yeah, both my parents were educators, and I recognized early on that I had that gene, teaching and
Hmm.
coaching. That's what I really love to do. So with that, because it's really interesting. I could have kind of agreed with everything and describing some things that I do and some things we do with the network here at Seek Go Create. What
Hmm.
are some things that excite you about that mission? And what are some things right now that maybe frustrate you about that? Because making an impact can be very frustrating. It can be for me. In fact,
Yeah.
I've been in a little bit of a mood recently. I hope I'm not too edgy on the call here, but I've been in a little bit of a mood here that we've got some headwinds with making impact, and maybe that's just some personal stuff. But
Hmm.
positives, some exciting things that you've got going on, and some things that's like, man, this is frustrating to me.
Yeah. The most exciting thing is when someone is coming for advice. And I've always used the habits or the principles that I outline in this book as my structure for advising someone, for asking them questions, for helping them step outside of themselves to think of themselves or their problem a little bit differently. And what's the most exciting is when you see the light bulb go off, or you make a suggestion or a recommendation. So I can go on and offer an example if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead and give me an example. We are going to spend more time with your six in just a moment. I've got
Mhm.
some highlights and
Okay.
questions. So let's don't dive into that just yet, but go ahead with an example. And then I do want to hear what's frustrating you, because there could be some similar things that I'm seeing that I'm kind of going, okay, this is kind of bugging me right now.
Yeah, so the example is over the past weekend, I was speaking at a conference of women executives. And one of the women came to me because she had been toying with the concept of writing a book. But she was intimidated. She wondered whether what she had to say would resonate, widely. Was there an audience for her topic? And so we spent a little bit of time talking about it, and I applied the take stock. Where are you now? Where do you want to go? What's the gap in terms of information that you want to fill to help people look at things or look at themselves differently? So we talked about that, and talk to her about how to take a hand, how to get help with writing a book, that you don't have to sit necessarily at a blank screen and do it on your own. You can use a ghostwriter like I did. So we started to problem solve around it. And she went from kind of like intimidated, like, how would I ever do this, to seeing a light for how it could be possible. And I really get life off of seeing that light go off in someone.
Yeah. And beautiful. So what frustrates you about attempting to have impact in the world we're in today?
It feels so big. There are so many problems and complexities and divides in the world right now that you feel a little bit frustrated because yes, you're making an impact, but it sort of feels like one person at a time, and it feels like we just need to have um, a big mass connection, and so that's a little bit frustrating.
Yeah.
trying to figure out how to really be impactful with some of the big problems that people are facing now.
And it's interesting, as someone who I do some speaking, and obviously we have a podcast, we're attempting to do some things also, and getting people to think differently and just be more open and growth minded and all. It's kind of the same thing, because what you said, I was sitting there thinking, said, okay, what a positive, how exciting. She made an impact. And
Hmm.
you probably made more of an impact this weekend than with that one person. But and I'm not saying you didn't talk to other people, I'm sure, because you're networking and all that, but that's the one
Hmm.
that sticks in our mind.
Right.
And it's so interesting. This is like sort of a sidebar, but it's sort of related. My wife and I right now are doing a read through the Bible, and we're deep in the Old Testament,
Hmm.
like deep,
Hmm.
deep in some of the ugly Old Testament stuff.
Hmm.
And we sit here and we think about what would it have been like to be living in those times.
Hmm.
And we wonder if maybe we are, it's kind of like there's so much going on that could get us down.
Oh my gosh, yes. From, disease, right? And all the climate issues and war and, you
Yeah.
know, yeah, we could just go on, but
Yeah. Yeah. And even the nature of the place that you're in, Washington, D.C. And this doesn't matter which side of whatever people are on.
mhm.
It's just a very potentially exhausting environment. So,
Yeah.
so in the midst of that, we have a conversation and we have an impact.
Mhm.
And it nourishes our soul. It makes us want to keep going and all. And so with all that, we went big picture. I want to
Mhm.
back up. I want to back up, and I want us to have a little bit of fun. And sometimes I use the word fun in a little bit different way, just so you know.
Okay.
Want to have a little bit of fun with kind of your story. And
Mhm.
you share a lot of it in the book, but I want us to talk about it here because we are real big here at Seek Go Create with talking about success.
Mhm.
But what does real success mean, and what is our journey along the way? So let's back up, and we don't have to go over all of that because people need to get the book and read it. However, give the listener, myself, a little bit of how did Vita come to be? What was her growing up experience, and what were some significant things that happened along the way?
Yeah, well, obviously, I've talked about my biggest influencers being my parents, but from the perspective that they focused on what's possible and to achieve what could be possible, what my responsibility is. So I grew up in a household where, there was just a natural sort of resilience and also very much a self focus in the things that you can control. And really, the only thing that we can control is ourself and our own reaction to all the things that might go on around us. None of us can, control the course of fate. We can uh, position ourselves as best we can. We can deal with people who may be difficult, but we can't make them stop being difficult because everybody has free will, right? And so I grew up in a household where you really had a sense of personal accountability, in a household where it was clear to all of us what our jobs were supposed to be. So, my father, it was a very, traditional sort of home in that my dad worked, my mom stayed home and took care of the home, took care of us. That was defined as their jobs. And our job was to go to school, get good grades, and, not make a lot of trouble. Um, so everybody like bought into their jobs and so I viewed it as my responsibility to perform at school as best as I could because that was the job I had been assigned and I just accepted it. I didn't even think of challenging it.
And my guess, especially knowing what your collegiate career and all it,
Hmm.
my guess is you did well in school.
Yeah, well, it was also because growing up, my sister and I went to a Catholic school. We were two of the only non-white kids in the school, and so we stood out. And our mother impressed upon us that you better stand out for positive reasons. You stand out because, your uniform is neat. Your book bag is tidy, you're doing your homework, and you're getting good grades, but don't stand out because you're acting out or not listening to the teacher or standing out in any bad ways. So we felt that sort of responsibility as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so one of the things I would love for us to just converse about, and I picked up on a lot of the tone in the book too, is I grew up in a different environment. I would have
Mhm.
been on the flip side of those numbers that you just mentioned. I went to a public
Mhm.
school, but everybody looked like me.
Mhm.
Bunch of white kids in the suburbs of Atlanta,
Mhm.
and the white kids kept piling in because the white parents kept trying to get out of Atlanta because of
Mhm.
what was going on in the 70s and all there.
Mhm.
So, and I've attempted to kind of stretch my mind to think about what has that done for me as far as paradigms and things like that.
Mhm.
So, but I'm going to ask you first, and then if we can have some dialogue, that'd be cool about it. What were some things that you believe benefited you because of that setting you grew up in? And then what do you think? And I don't pick up on any kind of victim tone, because
Mhm.
sometimes people go down that path, and that's dangerous. We
Yeah.
know you don't write a
Mhm.
book like you just wrote and think that, oh, poor pitiful me. No, but what are
Not at
some of
all.
the positives? And then some of the things that it's like, oh, okay, that wasn't so good about the way we grew up. Because just because you look different, that's not necessarily the negative. Sounds like a little bit of a positive, maybe.
Mhm. It can be because you do stand out. If your eye scans a schoolyard, you stand out as a little bit different. Um, and so from that perspective, uh, you stand out. But then you're a kid. You want to blend in. You want to make friends. You just want to be part of the crowd. And so there were groups within the school that I gravitated to just to be one of the other children. So um, I would say though that as I look back on the impact of being of a different race and having brown skin in an environment where that makes you stand out, it did make me conscious when the spotlight shone on me, to be a positive reflection of my family and all of its values. um, Also, I felt as though as I grew up that being different, um, and returning to an environment that our neighborhood that was largely African American, I do feel that as I progressed professionally, it's given me a sense of fluidity in that I'm very comfortable in an environment where I may be the only one, but then I'm comfortable in an environment where there are more people like me, from a lot of my travel and experiences being around people whose background or upbringing or race or religion or sexual orientation are different from mine. You get to have a lot more exposure, but that feeling that you have from having been different or standing out because of things that are really uh, just innate to you has for me made me a little bit more empathetic for people who may be in a situation of being an underrepresented group, in a society, whatever the majority might be.
Right, right. So yeah, and that's good. And like I said, from reading and studying, it's like, okay, there is no poor pitiful me at all. I mean, this is like you own it, and you move forward with it. There's something you said earlier that was interesting about, I think we were talking about where we grew up or something like that.
Mhm.
And it's interesting that that is something you were talking about what we can control and what we can't control.
Right.
And where we are and where we come from, there's a lot of that we just can't control. And I actually I kind of peg the scale of I like to control my world as much as I can.
Mhm.
And the thing that is frustrating at times is recognizing how little probably that we really can control. Probably just this small little space maybe in here is it and all that. So tell us a little bit, Vita, so that people can get a grasp of the breadth of experience that you've had, kind of your journey, because, and you do talk about it a good bit, but I want us to kind
Hmm.
of talk about, because you went corporate, and that was a cool story where you actually got the job in the with Sunoco, the fuel industry, I think,
Yeah,
if I'm right there.
yeah,
And then you kind of moved to nonprofit. And then later I want to talk about some kind of contrast between profit and nonprofit. But give us a little bit of your professional journey so that we
sure.
can kind of get a feel for that.
Sure. So what I've learned, I guess, in terms of my professional journey, is a sense of self ownership for my, ability to progress or reach out to achieve a goal. And so when I was in law school, I had a background in business administration. That was what my undergraduate degree was, business and management. And I really wanted to work in the field of corporate law. And my father had been a small business owner, so I, grew up watching him talk about his business and run it. And my dad was the type of guy that offered you two choices that he thought were, what you should be pursuing. If you were good in science, you should pursue, and math, you should pursue a career in medicine. And if you're good with words and English, go become a lawyer. And he would talk up those two choices. And so I kind of gravitated to law and thought about combining it with business and wanted to work at a corporation as an intern or law clerk for a summer experience. And at the school where I was going, there weren't any corporations that were coming through interviewing. So I decided, this is back in the pre-internet days. So it was days that it took quite an effort. I had to go to the library, look in a book, copy down addresses of companies and the names of their top lawyers and write to them, paper mail, and wait for them to write me back.
We just lost.
So
We have some of our audience that are going, I don't even know what they're talking about. What's
snail
going on?
mail, right?
It's like, it's actually like you put it in an envelope, you put a stamp on it. There's a stamp thing that you put on,
Exactly.
and you put it in this box, and it just magically
And you would
appears.
just mail out multiples of them. So, I mailed out lots, tens and maybe hundreds of letters to different corporations, seeing if there was an opportunity for me to work with them over the summer. And all I got were rejections. But by talking about it, I heard that Sunoco accepted interns for the summer. But by the time I wrote to them and they received the letter, through the postal mail, all the positions were filled. So I wrote back and said to them that this is something I really wanted to do, and I would offer, to work for them for free. Like, they didn't have to pay me. I just wanted the work experience. And they thought that was an offer that they could accept. And they said, yeah, we'll let you work, but we really mean it. We don't have budget to pay you. It's going to be a volunteer internship. And I did. And I went there and I felt weird. I stood out, was different in that, I wasn't being paid, but taking on the work and working really hard. And by the end of the summer, I got really good reviews and ended up being one of two out of the six of us that was offered a permanent position. I say that because I had to take a risk. And in order to work for free, that meant moving back into my parents' house, living in my childhood bedroom. That felt very humbling when you think of yourself as an adult, with your normally your own apartment, making your way. But it ended up being successful for me. Then when I left Sunoco, it was because I had been working at the company for about 10 years. I really fell in love with the Maryland and DC area and wanted to move back there. So I was looking to target for a position that would move me back into an area closer to where I went to college. And then I heard about a position that was at the American Corporate Counsel Association. Quite a different experience moving from a big, Fortune 100 Sunoco, big company, energy company, 30,000 employees, to a nonprofit of about 30. But it was to practice law and work on resources for lawyers, another bar association. So I was interested in the job and had the good fortune of the general counsel who had been involved with the association and founding it, saying to me that, well, it's a very different situation. It's very different from the type of law that you're doing. But if you want to try it, go ahead, and give it a try. If you don't like it, you can come back, but you only have 2 years to make that decision. So that was another risk for me, and it worked out well. 2 years passed, and I wanted to stay. And I've been working in nonprofit, associations ever since.
Yeah, that's so. And the reason that I like that, and you're kind of incorporating some of the principles in here, which is the taking risk, which is something that I like. But what is it? There is a big difference between that for profit big corporation. I work for Bell
Oh,
South
yeah.
Corporate. I worked for Bell South Corporation coming out of Georgia Tech for about 9 years. And then
Hmm.
I started my own company and we started doing our own businesses. There's a big difference between those two, but there's a big difference between that for profit and nonprofit. For the person that's never made that type leap, give a little bit of pros, cons, differences between the two, just so we can kind of
Yeah.
get educated on that. I think that'd be valuable.
The difference at a big company like Sunoco, it's so resource and people, heavy. And so I don't know if you need a whole lot of things photocopied or if you need technical support, there are people to come and do it for you. But when you move to a nonprofit of 30, you better learn how to climb under the desk and be technical support, for yourself because, the organization is a whole lot smaller. So there aren't as many people that you can call when you experience problems. So it really forces you to have to learn to navigate and figure it out on your own.
Yeah. Did you like wearing a lot more hats? Because I do
Yeah, it was a
agree.
very
You're in a large corporation and it's just like you just stay in a one lane, sometimes one cubicle, and you stay there
right.
and don't move.
Yeah. And you have a role in the big corporation. I had a role. I was doing corporate securities, contracts, transactions, financing. If there was a people issue, like an employment issue, there was someone else who had that expertise that would go to. So you had a lane and you stayed in it, and other experts addressed other things. Well, when I moved to a nonprofit, sometimes they might want help, or have employment related issues or a contract, or in the case when I went to the nonprofit, they were about to move, so they were renegotiating their lease of space, of office space, so I got involved in that. So there was an opportunity to really impact the organization in so many ways that you don't when you're in an organization that's so big that you're given an assigned lane. And I took to it. I liked the entrepreneurial aspect of it. I liked how quickly things moved because in a bigger organization, there's a lot more thinking and almost analysis paralysis sometimes that you don't have time for. At a smaller organization, you have to be lot more nimble.
Yeah, that's one thing I found that I flourish in much better. I get frustrated when we talk about things and have meetings and talk about things. And it's like, why don't we just go ahead and make a decision here?
Hmm.
So, one of our kind of sub taglines here, Vita, is this aspect of redefining success. And we talk about success sometimes in a little bit different way, and in the world out there, I'm kind of pointing for those that may not be able to see. I'm pointing outside my RV where I'm sitting right now. In the
Hmm.
world out there, success is often defined by how much money you make, the cars in the garage, the houses, stuff like that. And
Hmm.
there's nothing wrong with all that stuff.
Hmm.
However, we like to dig a little deeper here. And we found that a lot of times success is redefined when we go through what some may call a failure or a challenge, or we're upended, or something does not happen like we thought it would. What are some examples along your way, in any time along your path, where you've
Hmm.
kind of had to redefine what success looks like? Obviously, leaving a for profit for nonprofit may be one, but anything else that you've kind of like going, oh, you were reeling or challenged and said, okay, success might look different than I thought it did.
Yeah. Well, I will say that I agree with you. Sometimes you can get caught up on this treadmill, right? Running, 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 running. When I made the decision to move to Washington, D.C. and leave big for profit and, all the benefits and compensation that come with it, it was to take a pay cut and go to work for an organization that was much smaller and more entrepreneurial. So that's what causes you, when I got to the 2-year point where I could make a decision to go back, within that short period of time, what kept me going, even though you've given a lot of the, financial trappings or such, was just the work that I was doing and the more immediate impact that you see for the work that you do. I also had more time to mentor people, which is something, that I enjoyed. So you had time for other things in life that give you joy or a sense of fulfillment. And I think that's what we're all seeking ultimately, or that we all get around to that eventually.
It kind of goes back to something you said even at the very beginning, that example you gave of someone that was impacted by some things you said. So obviously, this mentoring role that you have is important for you. At what point did you recognize that I call it, you have the gene? I just wanted to be a coach from the time I was a kid. Both my parents were educators, and I went a different direction. But I've always come back to kind of coaching. So they're related, but cousins. When did you recognize I really should be mentoring other people
Um,
on the
you know,
playground when you were?
well, no, I think it was after I went to law school. That's when it really started. And it's because all up until that point, I was striving, 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 you know, to get a college degree, to take the LSAT, to place high enough that I could get into law school, to do well in law school, to graduate, to pass the bar. It was always like there were so many rungs. Well, when I finally was all grown up and had achieved that professional objective, at least, um, I tended to encounter people who were trying to find their way along a similar path. And I felt like I had something to share and some encouragement to offer that, I will say that I was a good law student. I wasn't the smartest in the class. You won't see my name at the top in terms of having graduated with honors, but I was able to find myself to jobs that I enjoyed and to be satisfied and fulfilled with it. So I would encounter other people who would say, well, I don't know if I could get into law school. And I would say, well, yes, you can. Here are some advice that I have in terms of how you go about studying, how you go about applying, um, how you present your credentials so it's more attractive on an application. So I just started giving people advice. Um, and so you help someone, sometimes they would say to someone else, "Oh, you should talk to her." Well, I was very complimented by that because finally you feel good. You're at a point where you really have something to offer, where up until that point, it was all about me looking to others, "Oh, help me find my way." So you feel like you've accomplished something and you feel proud of yourself and happy to be able to share it with other people. That's how I got hooked.
So when
But I've
you
also been a beneficiary of so many people investing in me. So one of the things I've learned that I talk about in the book in the chapter "Take a Hand" is all about both being humble enough to admit when you need help and ask for it. And the higher up you perceive yourself as going, or the more that you achieve in terms of professional success, the harder sometimes it is to admit, hey, I need somebody to help me. And then to take the step to articulate where you're struggling or failing, to have someone invest in you. So you have to have more of a humble spirit that way to let people invest in you. But the interesting thing, Tim, I found is that when you are a net giver and you spend more time thinking about the people that you're going to invest in and help, you develop a muscle memory for problem solving that helps you navigate your own problems so much quicker and easier. Because when you've counseled someone on how to get that next job. When it's your turn, you've thought through a lot of you can almost turn the advice around and have a muscle memory for yourself. And that's the benefit. You're benefiting from the advice that you're giving other people. And
Mm.
so that's one of the things I like to spotlight. It's better to be a net giver.
Yeah, I like that term net giver. I'm not sure that I've heard it that way because I was thinking about what happens with people when they isolate. And I
Mhm.
think that happens in all. I think some people reach levels of success where they isolate themselves from others and they don't turn around and give back or even remain humble to ask because
Mhm.
not sure that anyone knows it all, even though
No.
some people seem to act like they do. And anyway, but I love that when you mentor, is it formal? Do people come to you? Do you just interact with people and say this? Because you mentioned something at the beginning. It bells went off in my head. You said that someone came to you at that conference this last weekend. And to me, that's one of the big differences. At times, I will attempt to impact people that aren't coming to me. And I
Mhm.
think that can be very frustrating. Someone came
Yeah.
to you. So, do people come to you and say, "Hey, Vita, can we interact?" Or do you identify people within your organizations that you work with? Or how does that work? And then we're going to dive into the book here in just a few minutes.
Yeah, it's a combination of both. At the event where I was, there were a number of, women leaders, and they knew about my book because it was, part of the conference agenda and it was featured. So I also believe that one of the things that I'm fortunate that people tell me is that I'm come across very approachable. I'm the type of person that walks into a room and I smile at people or notice the other people who might be in the space. And that tends to disarm people. It tends to make people sometimes a little bit more curious. And you just sort of have nonverbal cues and signals that it's okay to come up and say hello, that you're not trying to put up an artificial barrier between you and the people that you may be speaking in front of, if it's an audience or in a smaller group setting, that, you're open to hearing about them and sharing.
Yeah, that being inviting is so powerful because I think a lot of people go around and I use the analogy when I used to teach this in corporate of it's almost as if a lot of people have this block wall in between them. I'm kind of making this my hand
Hmm.
like where we are here on the Zoom.
Hmm.
And I think part of my role, it sounds like your role, you consider it the same, is to lower those barriers as much as we
Yes.
possibly can so that if Vita and Tim need to do some business together, if we just need to encourage each other up, whatever, those
Hmm.
barriers aren't there. And unfortunately, what we see, I think, in the world is there's just a lot of barriers between people, and
Yeah,
we need to bring
I
them down.
agree. I agree. And one of the ways that, you can just signal that you're interested in people is really looking them in the eye and listening. I'm in a town like Washington, D.C., and so there are times when this town can be quite superficial. And although I live in the DC metropolitan area, I'm not of or from this area. I grew up in a place where people say hello, look one another in the eye, have a conversation, and aren't like looking over your shoulder to try to see if there's somebody better who's going to come along. And so all you have to do is experience that one time when people look through you like you're not even there. And for someone like me, it's like I don't ever want people to feel that way because of how I've treated them.
Mm.
So part of the reason why perhaps I've had such wonderful opportunities to have genuine conversations with people is because I'm interested and I pay attention to them.
Mm.
Something as simple as that, right? Not look through somebody.
Right, Vita. So somewhere along the way, Vita woke up and said, I'm going to write a book. I need to put
Mhm.
some of my wisdom. I've been mentoring. I've gone through these experiences. What provoked or what was the catalyst for that? I'm always intrigued by that when I have authors because I think back on what provoked me to write. And what was it with you? What was it that you said, you know what, I need to
Yeah,
share?
thank you. Well, it was because I've talked about these principles. So I have a very externally facing role. And I get invited in, speak to this law student group, speak to this other association, speak to, it was a women's executive leadership forum. And so when I do, and I talk about these principles, I've had people come up and say, "Oh, I was trying to get down what you were talking about, and you were talking, I couldn't write fast enough. Do you have an article? Have you written it down? Do you have a book that I could read to delve in a little bit more?" And I'm like, "No, here, take my card. If you have questions, just be in touch with me." So this is how I reach out. And then, the number of people that I speak with or might seek advice would multiply. Um, and so when people would ask me, I think, I don't have time to write a book. I'm not a book author. How would I even do that? I'm scared of that blank screen and how you would get started. And so I would just say no and then offer them something else, like, give me a call. And so at one point, I was being interviewed by a blogger, about these principles, and someone who is a fantastic writer and has written books. And she validated me by saying, "I really do think you have a book here, and I think you should pursue it." And that validation from someone who is an expert made me feel encouraged, just that little boost. And then when the pandemic hit, I was approached, by Forbes about the possibility of becoming one of their authors. And because of that validation I had received, it made me listen and think about it. And her encouragement helped me to potentially see myself in a new light.
Mm.
But I was smart enough, I needed help. So thankfully I had a ghostwriter.
And you know what? And I have never seen someone who allowed their ghostwriter to write the forward. That was fascinating. So I'll let people, we'll leave that as a tease for people to check that out. But I wanted to read something real quick here. The title of the book is Take Six. And we're going to look at the six principles here in just a moment, or habits. And the subtitle is interesting to me. I want to read this because it's got some big words here. Not, well, sort of big words, but I'm not talking about big words, hard to say, but big words that mean a lot. Essential habits to own your destiny, overcome challenges, and unlock opportunities. That's a big subtitle.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
there's a lot there. And so I'm going to layer it with a question. When you talked about your first day walking in at Sunoco, you
Mm-hmm.
brought up that you didn't really feel like you belonged. And
Mm-hmm.
as someone who's just written, there's a lot of books out there, Vita. There's a lot of people that have written stuff and a lot of people that have written good stuff. Excuse me. I've recently gone through this and I'm just curious if you had this thought ever. Does the world really need another book with essential habits or something like that? Did you ever go through that at all when you were going through this
Sure, I
process?
had self-doubt. Yeah, of course you do. You have doubt about, is anybody going to buy it or read it, or is it just going to fall flat? And then you feel like, I've invested so much of my time and also everyone else's time who was associated with supporting it. Yeah, so you have self-doubt, you have fear. These are very personal stories that I tell. You wonder, how are they going to be received? Are you going to be, end up feeling silly, for having been so vulnerable and shared such personal aspects of your journey?
Yeah, but
Yeah,
you
so
did.
I think that's natural.
Yeah, but you did very well. And I think the personal aspect of it is the uniqueness. That's the unique part, is that no one can have the experience that you've had as
Yeah,
you.
and so I think it's this way in terms of how I look at professional settings. I don't look at it as I deserve this. I look at it as I will earn this,
Mm,
right? So when you have that now what do we deserve? We deserve to be treated with respect, you know, that's number one. We deserve to be treated with kindness, not for people to be unkind or mean or degrading or all the negative things that we could say. So we owe one another respect for each of our humanity. That's what we deserve. But we don't deserve this job or that job. We earn the right to have it. And when you're earning it and you know it's you that has to demonstrate and prove, that's where sometimes you have a little bit of doubt sometimes as you're kind of um, racking up the successes that will later give you confidence. But when you start out, you don't have that track record.
Right. Well, I will say, great job on the book. Like I said, I was able to read through half of it. Now, one of the things you did is you've got, and I'm kind of going, I just got a new Kindle, so I'm trying to go to my highlighted items here.
Mhm.
Um, these six habits that I got through a portion of them, but I did kind of look through to make sure I knew what all of them were. Can you just quickly hit each one? And maybe in the
Yeah,
time we have left, we'll dive. There's one that I think I might want to talk in more detail, but maybe we'll just see how that goes. So, real quick, give us the six, and then we'll see if we have time to do a little bit of a deeper dive into one of them.
great. Well, I'm really proud of the fact that they rhyme. So it is.
Yeah, and they all fit together. I like, because when I saw the book title "Take Six," I'm going, "Huh, I wonder what this means." And then, boy, but you took all that and you made it fit in with the six habits. So really cool. Good job there.
Thank you. So I'll say them fast and then I'll unpack.
Good.
Take so it's take stock, take risk, take credit, take a hand, take a stand, take command. The first one, take stock, I think is the one to spend the most time on. It's all about being honest with yourself and assessing, where am I now? Where do I want to end up? What's the gap? And then setting your plan to clarify what that gap is. It's all about for you defining what success looks like and feels like for you in relation to where you are now. Take risk is all about recognizing that in order to advance, you can't stay paralyzed in what you're doing now in the same way. That in order to grow, you have to take a risk, to take a step outside of yourself and be willing to change your status quo. Take credit is all about learning to assess and share what you're good at, what contributions or value you could bring to any situation. How did you contribute to a job well done? And always acknowledging the contributions of others, but not at your own expense. Take a hand, we've already talked about. It's about being humble, admitting you need help, asking for help, but at the same time, being a net giver to reach out and be able to help others with any challenges or advice that they may need. Take a stand is being clear and understanding what your values are and knowing that there are some situations where you need to be able to speak up in and support who you are. And take command is all about the fact that we each have opportunities to lead. I lead an organization. There are people who lead a nation. There are people who lead a team. And there are other people who may lead a project, or a situation might call for a leader. Like if a bus derails, or runs off the highway, someone needs to step up, take the lead within that group, and kind of plot the path for people to find their way to safety, and that situational leadership. So we all have opportunities to lead, and take command is all about bringing your own authentic approach to leadership, not feeling like you're bound by what everyone else did before you.
Yeah, all those are good. And just so you know, here at Seek Go Create, we talk a lot about leadership. And one of the things we do is we make sure that everyone knows that we don't assign leadership to a title or a position or anything like that. We have the assumption that everyone has a leadership role in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And the one
Mm-hmm.
that popped in my mind when you were saying that was your mother, because she wasn't in the business realm, but yet she probably led the family in a
Yes,
very
she
unique
did.
way. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's leadership. I mean, single
Mm-hmm.
moms, family members, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
all of those things, and even people that are certain ages. So, all right. So, what I want us to do, all of these are so rich and have so much depth to them, but we're going to let people get the book and get into most of them. There, you said, and I totally agree, because self awareness and understanding who we are is
Mhm.
foundational. So I'd love for us to take a couple of minutes to talk about that one. And if
Mhm.
we have time, I want to talk about risk. There's something that I want to circle back to that we talked about at the very beginning that I want to tie together with risk. So let's talk about taking stock and what people
Mhm.
need to know about themselves to get this process started and to really be able to succeed.
Yeah. So there is a free resource on the website for the book, take6habits.com, that in a professional, if you're looking at it from a professional standpoint, um, some tips that you can use to take stock. So if you aspire to a different position or a certain type of job, then measure what are the educational requirements for it? Does it require special training or skills that you may need to acquire? What skills do you already have that would lend themselves readily to that position? Perhaps you have all the, education or training, but you have to demonstrate some experience related to the position. What are you going to do because you don't have that role right now that approaches it or has shades of the right experience that might naturally correlate to that? Sometimes you may have the experience and you may have, the knowledge and training, but you just need to hear about the opportunity. And so in that case, you need to think about your professional networks. Where are places that you can become more active or visible so that you can hear about or position yourself to learn about opportunities that you can, put your name in to potentially achieve. So there are a lot of things that you can do, from thinking about education, training, experiences, skill sets that you have to demonstrate, making your checklist of achievements so that you can talk readily about them. And all of these things are ways that you start to assess where you have gaps and then think about, what's the gap and the plan for being able to fill it. And then, Tim, the other habits are really about gap filling.
Yeah.
You know, stepping out of yourself to take a risk, to take on a new project that would allow you to demonstrate new skills to earn you that promotion. That's taking a risk. Or taking a hand to ask someone who has been doing the job that you have, hey, look, these are the skill sets and abilities that I think I might demonstrate. Tell me, do you think there are things on my list that I'm missing that I need to consider? So, you know, take credit, listing your accomplishments, being clear about it, learning how to speak about it, not thinking of it as bragging, but thinking about it as sharing, and sharing authentically about what you can bring to the table. So as you can see, the other habits are really about helping close that gap.
Yeah. And the reason I think that's good, it's almost like as I was reading, I saw like it circling because it's like none of them ever really end.
Hmm.
My wife and I are both, we're 58 years old. We've got
Hmm.
successful businesses. We're grandparents now, which is the best job ever, just so everyone knows. And yet we right now are taking the next few weeks to
Hmm.
take stock. We literally are saying, okay, what would we like to do for the next 5 years? What's now our 5 year plan? I've just finished writing a book myself. I've got a few more
Hmm.
novels and I'm going to be working on, and my wife's working on some projects, and we're doing that. I think one of the things is most people need to recognize, and I know you would say this is all a process. This is not an event. These are habits,
Right.
right?
Yes. Yes. And so, um, it's funny that claiming that word habit had me filled with anxiety. Because when I
Really.
grew up, coming through college and, professional, like grad school, there was Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I had in my mind like habits is associated with the 7 habits. How could there be space for me to even claim that word habit? Was it a little bit, you know, too ambitious for me to even claim that word? And it's funny that it was my editor and ghostwriter who pointed out that those habits are about being effective. My habits are one fewer, and it's about really self actualization or setting your goals and defining what success is for you. So I started thinking about it. Yeah, it's true. People can be effective at what they do, but are they fulfilled by what they do? And this book is really about having you define what's fulfilling and successful for you, and then having the habits regularly exercised to close that gap and achieve it.
All right. So the last one we've got a couple minutes here. And the one that, and it could have been, late last night when I was reading this one. So it kind of rolled around in my head all night long as I was sleeping. But that area of taking risk, it fascinates me because the thing that you talked about there was how we get in a zone. We'll call it the comfort zone. I think you actually use those words. And Vita, this almost goes back to a topic we talked about earlier, where we were raised, our dogmas, the way we think, all of that kind of gets pressed in, and we start living, I'll say living small. And I don't think people like to admit that. What are some things that you have, some tips, some real practical ideas to start getting outside of the zones we're in? This is one more thing, and then I'll turn it over to you and let you chat. But I have found that many times people don't get out of those unless there's a catalytic event like COVID or
Right.
sickness,
Right.
illness, job loss, or something like that. But what can people do to be proactive to kind of start taking risk and get outside of those comfort zones?
Yeah, well, I think it starts, especially if you're very risk averse, with starting small. Start with something small. So it might be that you start by asking for training that, you might use if you're the type of person who never would usually ask for that. Well, could be an easier one, because then someone is investing in you. That's you stepping out of what your normal day to day would be, which is just, to be a little bit more closed off in terms of looking for growth potential. So that might be an easy one. It might be also if you're intimidated perhaps about going back to school. The internet provides so many opportunities to learn. You can Google on almost any topic and find instructionals that you can just take quietly at home to increase your skill set. So no one even has to know that you're stepping out of yourself by undertaking these activities. And so there are small ways that you can step out of your normal day-to-day approach.
Yeah, I would even pile on and say by listening to podcasts
Of
where,
course, yeah.
people are digging a little bit. Part of what I
Mm-hmm.
attempt to do to stretch muscles is ask questions like I did earlier. I
Mm-hmm.
grew up a certain way. I think I'm told in many ways that my age, white males are causing a lot of the issues today. I don't know if that's a little strong, but
That's
it's like
strong. Yeah.
I need to think differently and be open minded. And I think everyone needs to kind of be open to things. So that's
We all
excellent.
do. I think that the divides that we all see, without getting too political or delving too deep in it, we all know what the divides are or can think of some. It really does entail a lot of people, having more empathy and reaching out to one another and trying to find a place of understanding at least.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. So
yeah.
related to that, this might be the answer to the question, but my almost last question is, who is this book for? And what do you want the reader to take away when they're finished or they get through the book?
Well, the book is for people who are feeling like they want a little bit something to be different, who feel as though, um, you know, I need to assess where I am. There might be something else that I aspire to, or I just don't know. And, I want to think about what could be possible. And so it's really for people at all stages of life. I've been told that the habits in the book are good for someone starting out. And certainly I apply them. And, I've been working now for 30 years in different professional capacities. So these are the habits that I still use to this day, as a 30-year old, or 30, not 30-year old, I wish, but 30 years in law and business.
Right. Yeah. And I think I think we're close in our range there. So
Hmm.
we got a little bit of experience, but we got a long way to go too. We're
Yes.
just getting rolling here. So
Hmm.
and what's the takeaway? What do you want the reader when someone reads this? What would you like someone to run up to you at a conference and say, I read your book and blank?
They read the book, they thought about the principles or habits, started to regularly apply them, and it made a difference to them. Even greater it would be that they share it with someone else, because that is the whole net giver sort of philosophy.
Yeah, I like that. So take six essential habits to own your destiny, overcome challenges, and unlock opportunities. Vita, where can people get in touch with you? Where do you want them to connect with you? And I think you mentioned a website earlier. It'll be in the
Yes.
notes. Our people that do our notes, it'll be there. But for people that are listening in audibly, where do you want them to go? And is there another place that they could connect with you?
Sure. They can connect through the website, which is www.take6habits, all spelled out in words.com. And then my LinkedIn is there as well. So connect with me via LinkedIn, and that way we can keep in touch with one another, and I can also see what others are interested in.
Very good. We'll include links for all that. Vita, we are Seek, Go, Create, those three words. I'm only going to give you one word. You got to choose which one resonates more than the other two and why. That's my final question.
Definitely go.
And
And that's
why?
because one of the things I really love is I'm curious, and I love to travel and see different parts of the world and different cultures and meet people who have a different experience than me. And so I can't encounter all that staying home in my house. And I'm really excited that the world is opening back up again, and I can't wait to go.
well, you have expanded right now by talking to a guy that's in the passenger seat of an RV somewhere in South Dakota. So
Yeah.
that's even, and it's the beauty of Zoom. But yeah, Go is awesome. Vita, thank you so much. It's been such a blessing to
Thank you.
have this
I've enjoyed it,
to
Tim.
to have this conversation. If you have listened in and this has impacted you, if it stretched you, if you've gotten uncomfortable, even that's fine. What I'm going to ask you to do is to share this episode. Best way that people are exposed to new podcasts and new episodes, new things that they can listen to and be educated by is when someone personally shares it. So take a screenshot, or if you're on YouTube or one of the socials, just share this so they could hear this message and learn how they can take six and then get the book. If you haven't already, click on get the book. It'll be down in the links. And we've got new episodes every Monday. So until next time, continue being all that you were created to be.